Brad Stevens thinks he's slick. We see right through him. So the Celtics conference, who finally explained why the Sixers got Jaylen Brown for Paul George 2 firsts and 2 seconds. 29-year-old Finals MVP for 36-year-old Paul George, but instead of telling the truth, he danced around it. It was almost like the Celtics got together and were like, okay, we have to talk to the media. We don't want to say what we really think about Jaylen Brown. What should we say instead? I know. We'll call it this. Yeah. So Brad Stevens suspiciously said the same thing over and over.
I would say that it's a move to keep us at a very competitive level and give us optionality moving forward. But I chose still being good with more optionality. We wanted to stay good, and we wanted to add more optionality.
Optionality? What does that even mean? What it means is Jaylen Brown makes too much money and he ain't worth it. Kills the team. Stevens even hinted at this later. He said, you know, when we won the title, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown made 47% of the salary cap. It's 70% now and going up. Unsaid thing there is Jaylen Brown ain't worth 70% with Jason Tatum. Get rid of him. Oh, but Paul George is also making a boatload of money. What's the difference? The difference is that Jaylen Brown is under contract for 1 more year than Paul George. Not that much, but at 29 years old, he's also up for a Supermax extension they weren't gonna give him. Paul George is already done with all that. He will take a pay cut or retire. Boston doesn't see Jaylen on that level, but guess what? Neither does any team in the league, except Philly apparently, which could come back to haunt them. We'll get to that. But over the last week, some nasty stuff has come out about Jaylen Brown. Stevens may have been classy right there in front of cameras, but that organization has been leaking. But it is awesome that you guys love My Fit Foods just like I do. Made me so happy when they opened the Austin store recently, and 2 of the first people who walked into the grand opening said they heard about My Fit Foods from AM Hoops, and it makes sense. I have tried a million of these meal prep places. My Fit Foods, by far the best I have ever tried. The convenience is great, how affordable they are, and so tasty. They mix in new meals every month, so I never get bored. You guys know that I care about my fitness. For me, 90% of the whole thing comes down to what I eat. And you can walk into their locations in Portland, in Denver, in Houston where I live, or now in Austin, like I said. And if you use my code AMH25, you get 25% off. Again, that is AMH25 for 25% off at My Fit Foods. First, the initial asking price was 4 first-round picks, and the most aggressive suitors, according to The Athletic, were Denver and Portland. But both teams said, hell no, we're not going to pay 4 first-round picks for Jaylen Brown. Then The Athletic goes out of its way to say the Houston Rockets didn't even pick up the phone, who have Ime Udoka, who coached Jaylen Brown to the finals in 2022. Wonder how they found that out, because the Celtics front office leaked it to them. They wanted them to know. And the Blazers said their analytics view Brown as a negative player. Negative. But then an anonymous source went even further. Way further. A current general manager, speaking anonymously to comment on internal team discussions, told The Athletic in the wake of the trade he doesn't view Brown as a top 50 player in the NBA. Top 50. You cannot just say that and not back it up. You have got to have a very good reason there. And there's actually 2 good reasons for it. The first is analytics. We hear so much about how analytics hate Jaylen Brown. What are those exactly? Well, to sum it up, the Celtics saw no drop-off when Jaylen was off the floor, and in some cases, they got better. In fact, last season's C's were 9-2 when Jaylen missed a game. Last 2 seasons combined, 24-6. Last 3 seasons, 36-6. How is that possible? For example, when Giannis played last year, the Bucks were almost 500, not great. But without him, off a cliff to 15-31. Steph Curry holds Golden State together. So something's not adding up. When you look at his stats, Jaylen, 29 points, 7 boards, 5 assists. But somehow we're 3-11 against the top 3 seeds in the East and West. Weird. Well, an exec told ESPN the quiet part out loud. This is the classic case of all the credit just goes to the guy who scores, but they're not driving team success. And there's guys like this all over the league. The difference is Jaylen is not on $40 million like Brandon Ingram. He's at $60 million, and it's really hard to tie up that much money on your salary cap for one player unless they're truly generational, and he's not even close to that. That's exactly what Brad Stevens wanted to say, but he couldn't. Now, there's a lot of Jaylen Brown fans out there, but that perfectly sums up how the entire NBA feels about Jaylen Brown. And we know this because the offers were either non-existent or super low. And by the way, we're going to find out the truth to this next year and the year after that. Are the Celtics actually better? Are the Sixers worse? We'll see, but GMs view Jaylen closer to Russell Westbrook than like an Anthony Edwards, especially at that salary. The last Final Four teams were the Spurs and Knicks, Thunder and Pacers, all deep teams with versatile rosters, and you need Brad Stevens' optionality to pull that off. Well, Boston could pull that off before the second apron. They had Tatum and Brown, Derek White, Drew Holiday, Kristaps Porzingis, but this is a new era. So bottom line, if you're paid like a number one and you're not a number one, your team is screwed. You are about to be traded. That's the situation Boston was in and had to do something about it. But the other side to this is what should really freak out Sixer fans. The personality. The Athletic says the Celtics were afraid there would be huge friction in the locker room next season. Because it was clear, Jaylen loved being a leader on last year's team. In fact, you know his infamous line about how last year was his favorite year? That wasn't even all about the stats. It was about being a leader. He talked about the young guys, beating expectations, watching them grow. Do you think he was ready to take a back seat? Turns out the Celtics knew all this way before any of us. Because after Game 7 against Philly, the one postseason game where Jason Tatum could not play, what did JB say afterward? Well, despite a loss and an inefficient 12 of 27 from the field, tonight I wish we played more of that style and trusted that style more, even throughout the playoffs, even through wins and losses. Obviously, it's not the easiest decision, but I wish we trusted that more. Really, the one game Tatum doesn't play. So I am sure when he said all that stuff in the live stream, the front office was like, yeah, that's not a surprise to us. Pretty much said the exact same thing the day before. So what would it be like next year when the C's became Jason Tatum's team again? Like they want, not pretty. But now, he's gonna have to share the floor with potentially 3 Jason Tatums. First off, you know Joel Embiid views himself as a number one, even if he's past that. In reality, Tyrese Maxey plays like a number one, and VJ Edgecombe. Kid scored 34 in his first ever NBA game. With that alpha mentality, you think he's cool with just sliding back to a number 4? This could potentially be a disaster waiting to happen because Jaylen Brown's wish was to have his own team. Man got the exact opposite of that with this trade. Just think about how Jaylen likes to play. Ball in his hands, a lot of ISO. He was below average as a spot-up player, so he's not great off the ball. Meanwhile, Paul George actually embraces being a number 2, like he did on the Clippers. He shoots 40% on catch-and-shoot threes. And by the way, wouldn't it be just like Brad Stevens for all of us to say, what an idiot? Then a year later, everyone's calling him a genius. Like, there's 2 GMs you never want to really deal with. Sam Presti, Brad Stevens. Normally, if they're calling you, it's not going to work out great for your ball club. But you know what's funny? This has happened before in recent NBA history. There was a day when guys like Carmelo Anthony, Russell Westbrook were untouchable. Then analytics guys came in and were telling us they were overrated. And it seemed crazy at the time, but after a few years, became obvious. In this case, the Celtics didn't want to wait years to be proven right. So even though Brad Stevens was saying the right thing in front of cameras, they were leaking stuff behind the scenes. Okay, I changed shirts so you know it's the second half of the video. Microphone broke, so I'm using this one for the time being. So I did some thinking about this, and I decided that the Celtics front office and Brad Stevens didn't mess up when they traded Jaylen Brown for Paul George and basically 2 first-round picks, which is a ridiculous return, right? They messed up when they paid Jaylen Brown like a top 5 player, because at that point in this new CBA, no one wants to take his contract, and so you're going to have to take a crappy deal back. And that's when they messed up. But the fact is, with Jaylen Brown, they were almost in a position where they couldn't lowball him when they gave him the extension, the Supermax extension, without him feeling massively disrespected. Because you know you're going to give Jason Tatum the Supermax extension because he's probably a top 10 player. Jaylen Brown's not a top 10 player, but in his own mind, he feels like he's a top 10 player, and anything less will be such a massive disrespect that'll poison the well. Like I was just listening to, I was reading the Ramona Shelburne article about LeBron going back to the Lakers, and a big thing with LeBron is disrespect. He felt disrespected by the Lakers, and part of it is the money. He was going, LeBron, from like $50 million last year, and if he goes down to 25, that feels like a huge disrespect because it's a 50% pay cut. But if the Warriors pay him 15, objectively that's less than the 25, a lot less. But that's the Warriors paying him everything they can give. So it doesn't feel disrespectful, right? And it's the same thing with Jaylen Brown. 15, if he made less than Jason Tatum
at this point,
and was looked at less, the worst thing that could possibly have happened to them was he wins Finals MVP and Eastern Conference Finals MVP.
You know what
because
I mean?
At that point, how are you going to say anything different to him, right? But people don't regard him as a top 10 player. And he's going to be paid like that next year. He's going to be the 7th highest paid player in the NBA, expecting a 2-year max extension coming up. And they sure weren't going to pay him that. So as soon as they had already given him that max extension that they gave him, that's when they messed up. This trade, getting back very little, was inevitable. It was always going to happen. The moment he signed a Supermax contract as not a Supermax guy, that's when they messed up. And so, I was just looking at the Ringer before I went on here. They rank 100, top 100 NBA players. It's always a good source because they have like 10 different NBA writers who rank these things. So it's a good source, right? It's not just one person's opinion. And they've got him ranked at 14th. Jaylen Brown. They have Jason Tatum ranked at 13th, even though Jason Tatum's just back from the Achilles. They have Karl Anthony Towns ranked ahead of both of them. It's not good. And that's one thing that Brad Stevens said was like, you cannot have 70% of your salary cap tied up in 2 guys who aren't top 10 players. 2 guys who aren't top 10, it's impossible. And 70% of your usage rate. Right? So you have to have depth. And probably the model that most front offices want now is to have one Supermax guy and then everyone else making a team-friendly contract. That's what the Spurs will want with Victor Wembanyama. That was what the OKC model was with SGA and then everyone else below him. Or you can somehow have your best player take a discount and then you can spread the money around more. But that takes a very unique kind of guy, like Jalen Brunson. Just now, Donovan Mitchell took the max contract just now today. And he wants to win more than anything, they say, but not that much. So not many guys. So apparently the model is one Supermax guy. And preferably he's a top 5 guy in the league. Okay, to be a true Supermax, and then everyone else is going to take a team-friendly discount around him and have that depth. And a big bet that a lot of people are saying right now is that they're going to bet on Peyton Pritchard to be the Jaylen Brown replacement, not necessarily Paul George, and we'll see how that works. Apparently, there's all sorts of advanced metrics, speaking of which, that love Peyton Pritchard and say when Jaylen Brown sits, actually Peyton Pritchard is like all-star level. So we'll see how that works out. One thing that Brad Stevens didn't answer in his press conference was why did they have to do this now? Like, Jaylen Brown's under contract for 3 more years. It felt like they had their backs up against the wall. Like, they absolutely had to take a deal right now. It's almost like it felt like he had a trade. Yeah. Jaylen Brown had a trade demand saying, I will never play another game in a Celtics uniform. And they're like, well, shoot, we have to trade him now. We'll take really whatever we can get. But that wasn't the case, right? Jaylen Brown wasn't saying that. So why did they act like that? What happened? And that's what makes a lot of people wonder, like, was there something crazy behind the scenes? And the Athletic article basically explained it. The answer is that, according to their metrics, when Jason Tatum has a 33% usage rate and above, the Celtics are practically unbeatable when he has a 33% usage rate. This year, after he came back and it was Jaylen Brown Semi, had a 29% usage rate. And how are they going to go back to that? I don't want to go over everything that I explained in the video, but Jaylen Brown just wasn't going to accept that role anymore. And they could feel it. And they could hear it on the Twitch live stream when he said this was my favorite year. And it's not just about his career stats, his points, rebounds, assists. It's not just about that, the selfishness. It was also about being a selfless leader. He liked being the guy that everyone looked up to, unquestionably, and seeing the young guys grow and seeing them, beat expectations and being a part of that. He liked that. It's more about just his own stats, right? But asking him to take that step back again, they thought was not going to happen and that it was going to eventually be an ugly breakup. And so that's why they had to do it now. But the real test is what Brad Stevens does now with the savings that he will eventually have. And still a bunch of people are questioning, dude, if you, and I saw this very smart comment. Someone said, if this was about finances, then why didn't they just trade Jaylen Brown to the Kings for expiring contracts? And then you very quickly open up all that money, and then you can build around Jason Tatum. Why didn't they just do that? Why did they trade him to Philadelphia, who, you know, is going to play them 6 times next year, and a very high likelihood is going to make them look stupid, right, in their own building? Why not trade him to the West, to the Kings, for expiring contracts and get all this money opened up right now? Why not do that? And I think the reason is they still want to be competitive while having the optionality going forward. And Brad Stevens said this multiple times, and I believe him. They also did value, you know, making this big move, but also not being so bad next year that they waste another year of Jason Tatum's prime. That's why they didn't do it. They wanted to be able to get out of the extension years of Jaylen Brown and the 1 extra year that he has over Paul George, get out of that, but still be competitive and not waste Jason Tatum's prime. That's what it would be if you traded Jaylen Brown to the Kings and got it back expiring role player crap contracts. You would be absolutely wasting next year of Jason Tatum's prime, right? So that's what they did. They can always get out of Paul George's contract somehow later by dumping him. And so, you know, Paul if George, the right free agents come around, or the right moves come around. So it all depends, you know, now that they can see this vision in the future of having Jason Tatum as the Supermax with team-friendly contracts around him. It now depends on what Brad Stevens does next to build that team around Jason Tatum, you know? So we can't really judge this until we see how he uses this new tool he has, this new optionality he wanted so bad. How does he use that? And it's not going to be easy, dude. Like, this new second apron is so crazy because not only are we having different champions every year, it's so important to have a good front office, and the front office has to do everything now. They have to somehow get team-friendly contracts from guys. They have to somehow, by the way, draft and develop is so important now. That is like the absolute easiest, best, most efficient secret cheat code to having a manageable salary cap is to have young guys on their rookie contracts who kick ass. Young guys who are on a discount because they're on their rookie contract that play like the 7-8 year veteran already because they're so good. So if you can have a front office who can draft and develop, that is a badass front office. Never mind all the other stuff we've been talking about this whole time about getting guys on team-friendly contracts, making the right trades, not giving out stupid Supermax contracts like they did to Jaylen Brown, which eventually forced them into this shitty situation. It's because as soon as they gave him that contract and he wasn't worth it, they were screwed, and this was going to happen. And by the way, last year, out in the second round. This year, out in the first round. They were taking steps back. Jason Tatum already has a big injury. His clock is ticking on his prime. They had to do something. And they figured we're either going to choose Jaylen or Jason, and we all knew the whole time they were going to choose Jason. Duh. So, you know, that's what this whole thing was about. It's actually layered, okay? It's not so simple, you know? And so they wanted to remain competitive with Paul George, and that's what we're seeing. Okay, I feel like there was something else I want to say. Who cares? We're still waiting on LeBron James. We'll see about that. But in the meantime, we all thought that Jaylen Brown maybe was going to go to Portland.
Just money chasing.
And that would explain a lot of what they did with John Moran. It turns out now the Blazers have like 10 point guards, which makes no sense. So I broke down the whole thing and why the Ja trade to the Blazers makes absolutely no sense. Check it out.
Jaylen Brown on the Philly Sixers. Comment down below how many games you think they're going to win. Boom.